Some people love it and some people hate it, but over 9 million people call it home. This is Ho Chi Minh City, a place I was lucky enough to experience for a few days on my travels around Vietnam. In this video, we visit the famous tunnels used by the Viet Cong in the war, experience architectural marvels, delicious food, and then we make our way out of the city heading south to explore more rural areas. I hope you enjoy this episode of my adventures around Southeast Asia. We arrived in Ho Chi Minh late in the evening, and even at the later hour of the day, it was like entering a furnace. It was so hot, and then we drove through incredibly hectic traffic to get to our hotel. It was absolutely crazy and pretty immersive from the get-go, so we just walked down the road from our hotel to get some delicious food. I have to say that serving fried rice in a pineapple is a crazy idea, but one that is absolutely worth trying. All of our food was delicious, and we then got an early night as we had a city tour booked the next morning. Our first stop was the Reunification Hall, which has to be the most satisfying, beautifully built, architecturally incredible designed building I've ever seen. It went through a few ownership changes throughout the war and was originally built by the French, but then that got leveled and it was redesigned by a Vietnamese architect. And I have to say, this place makes me want to become an architect. It was obviously absolutely stunning visually, but there was also so much hidden meaning in every single thing about the design. I want my house to look like this. Everything is just beautiful. There are so many different rooms, so many different styles, but the overall design is really cohesive. We then went to the old post office and Notre Dame Cathedral, two colonial style monuments which both have a bit of history, and even though the cathedral was under works, it was so beautiful to see. I also sent a postcard to my friend in America, which hopefully has arrived there by now. We then went to the War Remnants Museum, where I cried a lot, as obviously they have a full history of the Vietnam War along with a bunch of photographs taken by what I would believe to be some of the most admirable and courageous photographers in the world. We also learnt about the ongoing effects of Agent Orange, which is the chemical that the States used in the war. We then went to visit the Choo Choo tunnels, which were built by the Vietnamese Coms during the war and total around 200,000 K, even though there are now very few of them. Even though the US had so many advantages in this war, it's easy to see how the Vietnamese managed to outsmart them using the advantages that they had, which were mainly knowing the terrain and the landscape really well. They had a lot of traps set up and things that were absolutely lethal, so it was really cool to be able to see, if not a little bit scary to think about the reality of. You could even go shooting at an air range if you wanted to, but it was a bit expensive and I'm not a big fan of guns anymore, so I passed it up. My main deduction from today is just that war is bad and we shouldn't do it. That's it. I'm in the bum tour of a B-52. Quite big. I'm not good at size estimates, but it's big. It's very big. The ground's like well above my head, probably like 2 meters. I don't know. We then went through one of the tunnels for around 100 meters, and honestly I found it to be a lot of fun as I'm not super claustrophobic, but it was very tiny, very narrow, and I would hate to think about how cramped and claustrophobic it would end up being if you spent long enough in there. The next day we left Ho Chi Minh and headed south, where we stopped at a few temples along the way, which were incredibly beautiful. At our first stop we tried some local honey tea with bee pollen, honey and a little fruit, which was absolutely one of the best things I've ever drunk. Okay, trying the local specialty honey tea. We then took a boat cruise through the Canal where we entered Bentray Province, or the land of coconuts. This was such a calming and relaxing ride, even though the canal was obviously very small. We then visited a coconut candy making shop. These were super simple to make and pretty healthy technically, but they were absolutely delicious. However, we were pretty hungry, so it was time for some lunch. We had some delicious food, including a deep fried local fish, which was one of the best things I've ever eaten and like the nicest fish I've ever tried. We then headed to Kanto City, where I found one of the most beautiful bridges I have ever seen in my life. It made me feel like I was in Singapore or some sort of big city like that, and I loved getting some of these beautiful shots.